Hello, I'm Michael Cantrell, and you are listening to the Prison Officer Podcast, a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops that work in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do to keep this world safe. If you love this podcast, hit the follow button, or better yet, share with your family, friends, or coworkers. Hello, and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My name's Mike Cantrell, and today's episode, I got a bunch of topics to cover, but we're going to kind of do a rundown of 2024 about the podcast, about corrections, and I got a few other things to throw in there. But I've done this, I think, almost every year, where we've talked about how the podcast is doing and maybe talk a little bit about corrections as a whole, where it's going. A lot of changes this year. I think there's going to be a lot of changes coming up in corrections. So, but let me start off with the podcast. It was a good year for us. Grew. It was a good year for us. We've grown quite a bit. It was a good year for us here at the Prison Officer Podcast. We've grown quite a bit. If you aren't aware, the Prison Officer Podcast is now on YouTube. So that was a big step for us this year. It was also quite a bit more work to post to multiple platforms. Now we're doing the audio and the video. So that does take a little bit of extra work, but I think it's worth it. A lot of people are using YouTube to tune into the Prison Officer Podcast. If you've been over there on YouTube, do me a favor. Reach up and hit that subscribe button. That does help us in paying for some of the bills and stuff that have to do with having and building and creating and keeping a podcast. So if you can reach up there and just hit that subscribe button, I'd appreciate it a lot. So far, since we came up on YouTube, we've had 25,000 views on there, which is really exciting. I like that. And on YouTube, you can listen to the audio podcast if that's what you want to do if you're driving, or you can listen and watch the video podcast. So multiple options there. Both of them are uploaded. So scoot on over to YouTube at the Prison Officer channel and check that out. One of our podcast hosts that, gives us updates and gives us analysis of traffic and stuff is Spotify. And so I just thought I'd let you know if Spotify said this year we've had 48% new followers, which is really cool. 70% of our listeners are new listeners. So I'm glad to have them on board from all over the country. And I know that because the Prison Officer Podcast on Spotify has been streamed in more than 40 countries this year. And on Spotify, we are one of the top 10 shows for 884 of those fans. We're the number one show for 143 of those fans. So that's really nice. And people have rated us on Spotify. We have a 4.6 rating, which I'm happy with that. Apparently the people that listen are mostly enjoying this podcast, and so that makes us happy. But as well as, like we talked about with YouTube, if you're on Spotify, go ahead and click that like, click that follow. It helps us a lot. Now, our main host, where I've hosted since I started this, is Buzzsprout. And right now, the Prison Officer Podcast is in the top 25% of all Buzzsprout podcasts. So that's really a great thing. I'm happy about that. We've been downloaded in 67 countries on Buzzsprout, which is just unreal. I never expected that when I started the podcast. I knew there was corrections other places, but I just never thought of it on that global scale. So it's really cool that 67 countries have downloaded us. And matter of fact, the number one city that tunes into the Prison Officer Podcast is Melbourne, Australia. Now, that doesn't mean there's not other cities in the U.S. and that the U.S. is the number one listenership. But as far as cities, Melbourne, Australia tunes in more than any other city by itself of the 67 that listen to us on Buzzsprout. So what do we got coming up? So in 2025, I've already got some guests lined up, and I'm excited about getting them in here and getting them interviewed. And one of them is Dan Seen. He is the St. Charles, Missouri County Jail Administrator. And we talked to him a little bit while we were at the Missouri Corrections Association conference. So I'm excited to get him in there. He's passionate about what he does. He's passionate about corrections. And so I'm looking forward to having a longer conversation with him and learning a little bit more. We're also going to have, I talked the other day by email to Philip Parker. He is the author of Guard, and that's a new book that's out there. And he was a Kentucky State Penitentiary warden for many, many, many years, and back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and I think even up into the 2000s. So I just started that book a couple of days ago. I got it back in on Amazon. I'm trying to get it read before we have the interview, but I'm really excited to have him on here, hear about the book, hear about the journey he took, and so we'll have him on after the first of the year. I've also got a CERT team leader, Connor Fredericks. I got him lined up. We're going to do an interview. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff with him. He's been leading CERT teams out there, seen a lot, and was recently attacked. So I'm interested to hear his story, hear how that went. I know that he's back to work and he's okay, but anytime one of the correctional officers or jail officers is attacked, that's very traumatic. It's traumatic for that person. It's traumatic for the shift, and so we'll hear more from him. So that's some of the stuff coming up in January and February next year. I've got a couple of other emails out to a few people, and we'll be talking to them also. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about my sponsors. They're what keep us going on here. Like I said, it does cost a little bit to do this. Of course, my first and sponsor that I had, and they're still a sponsor with us, and I'm also a master instructor for them, so it's nice to be able to have them on board and support me. They support me at work as an instructor, but it's nice to have them on the podcast and have them support me here, and this year was full of examples of how good Pepperball is. It's a non-lethal platform. You can use it to de-escalate and overcome almost any use of force challenge. There's just so many things and a lot of new stuff. You've got to take a look at the new launchers, new glass breakers, which gives us a whole new way to utilize these systems, these launchers, and another way to engage those suspects, those inmates that aren't being compliant. And so go over to www.pepperball.com. Take a look at the new launchers that came out this year and the new stuff that Pepperball's offering, and tell them I said hi. I've also got to talk about Omni real-time locating system. It's a company that I'm part of and have been working with them for several years, and this has been a big year. Everything's moving, everything's going. We've got that real-time locating system inside several jails this year. It's the best way to track and record the locations and interactions of all your inmates, all your assets. I've noticed that a couple of the agencies that have brought in Omni, they're looking at the fact that we can monitor a heart rate, and we can tell when that drops too low or when it goes too high. And in custody deaths are becoming such a hot topic in corrections. Fentanyl is a big part of that, and with the Omni RTLS, we can tell you the moment within 3 times a second when somebody's heart rate changes or drops off. So that's been a big thing. But new agencies coming online every month with Omni. And if you want to set up a meeting with us from your agency, reach out to www.omnirtls.com. That's omnirtls.com. And then finally, I guess all of this has happened this year with Command Presence. So I took a position as an instructor as the Director of Training for Corrections for Command Presence. And this year we've developed a lot of new classes. They're designed for corrections, by corrections. They're taught by corrections. So this isn't a law enforcement class that we're going to bring to your jail or prison and modify just for corrections. These classes are put together with corrections in mind. And we've got several of them out there. It's been a great year. I've got to teach several of them already, and I'm just excited about the response we've had and what people are getting out of these classes. So go on over to commandpresence.net, www.commandpresence.net, and check them out. A couple other things I want to talk about is I got some books for you to read this year. Okay. Of course, I mentioned Philip Parker. You can go on Amazon. Of course, I'll put all these books in the show notes, so you can go down there and click on them, and it'll take you to them. But his book, Guard, I'm about a third of the way into it. It's about Kentucky State Penitentiary, his life starting and becoming a correctional officer in that environment. And for me, who started at Missouri State Penitentiary, there's a lot in that book that resonates with me. I went through a lot of the same things that he talks about. So it's been a very good book so far, and I would definitely recommend it. And it's called Guard. And when you get inside the book, you'll see why he calls it Guard. He talks about that. But it's definitely worth a read. Another book out this year is by a friend of mine that I used to work with at the Bureau of Prisons, Brian Antonelli. He has put out the Leadership Field Manual for Correctional Professionals. And I can't think of a better person to write that book. Brian has been around corrections, longtime warden. He knows corrections. He knows how to lead people. He's often been used to come in and where there were problems, and he does a great job of identifying the challenges, working together with the people, and bringing them on board and getting that going. He's definitely someone who can write about leadership and knows about it. So if you'll check that out in the link, Leadership Field Manual for Correctional Professionals by Brian Antonelli. Another one that came out this year that I'm excited about, a friend of mine, we've had him on the podcast, William Young. He's from the Just Corrections podcast. He wrote Trained to Change, the Unfortunate and Unintentional Consequences of the Correctional Curriculum. And I got to read that book. I got to read it before it came out. He let me have a copy so that I could take a look at it. A very insightful book coming from kind of a different thought process than we've had before. Why do we do some of the things we do? And, he talks about how we're taught that, not only from each other and from the people already in the agency, but a lot of the agency training is set up to take our feelings and we suppress them. And that causes a lot more problems. And if you don't know any of William Young's stuff, he's really into officer wellness. And he's got a few other books out there, but I'll put some links to them. But check it out. Trained to Change, the Unfortunate and Unintentional Consequences of the Correctional Curriculum. That's by William Young at the Just Corrections podcast. And if you haven't listened to his podcast, I love his podcast. It's so full of excitement, and he gets so passionate about it. I click over there all the time just to listen to him. And one more book, finally. And this one is by me. If you had looked at the career guide, the Prison Officer Podcast career guide, I've done some updating and changed it around a little bit. It is now called The Keys to Your New Career. Keys to Your New Career. Information and guidance to get hired and be successful as a correctional or detention officer. And, I sat down, I put a lot of my thoughts into what I saw, not only hiring people, reviewing resumes, and just some common sense stuff on how to get hired in corrections, how to excel in corrections, and how to make this a long-term career. So it also, in the back of that book, I have an appendix that lists all 50 state agencies and their minimum requirements. So if you're looking to get into corrections, this is a great book. And the feds are in there, and I've got some of the big county jails are in there. So if you want that information, if you're looking to get into corrections and you want to know how to be a good correctional officer, that's definitely a book for you to pick up, and I'll have the link also in there. So let's talk about the end of the year for corrections. Of course, I teach, I don't know how many classes I taught this year, 25, 30 classes across the country. And we talk about a lot of the same things. I start most of my classes with what challenges are you guys dealing with? And the reason I do that is so that we can have a conversation, and hopefully I can bring information to them and guidance to them in the class to help them overcome some of those challenges. And, of course, the number one challenge is staffing, recruitment and retention. That's a tough one. It's hard. People are throwing money at this, but it's not necessarily always money. I'm sure you guys have read somewhere that people don't leave because of money. They leave because there's no passion, or they leave because of their bosses. There's so many other things that people leave for. People will stay and make less money in a job they care about when they're working with people and under a leader who they care about. They'll stay. So how do we correct that? And that's a question I get a lot. And the number one thing I could say is culture. It's got to be culture. Take a look at the culture at your jail. Take a look at the culture in your prison. Are people, do they feel safe? And I don't mean safe physically, although that's part of it. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel like when we have an idea, the boss isn't just going to bat it down. We want to feel like when we need a little help, there's people there that'll step over and help us, and we can help them. That's the kind of safe I'm talking about. Not just the emotional safe, not just the safe from violence, although that matters. If you don't feel like you can go to work without getting hurt, that's not going to be a place you want to be. But I'm talking about, is the leadership making this a place where you can excel, where you can get training, where you can apply that training, where you can use your skills? Believe it or not, that's what most people want to do. They have skills and they want to use them, and they want to be successful. And so many times these days, and it's been going on for a long time, I think corrections has always had this a little bit. We tend to, when somebody makes a mistake, to just slap them down. And we've got to get away from that. Mistakes are mistakes. Now, if somebody does something and they do something that is immoral, illegal, that hurts others, then absolutely. Let's deal with that and deal with it harshly. But when somebody makes a mistake, why do we have to bring the hammer down every time? Why don't we bring them in, help them, give them whatever it is that they were missing that caused that mistake? For those of you leaders who have not read Extreme Ownership, it should start with you. If you have employees who aren't doing what you need and who are repeatedly doing the same things wrong, that's not on the employees, that's on the leader. So let's take a little self-reflection. Let's figure out what it is that we're not providing. Let's figure out what it is that we can give them to make them successful and to let them use the skills that they have. What else is big right now? There's an article coming out in Corrections 1 that I recently wrote on mental health. Mental health is, of course, mental health in society has grown. So, of course, the amount of mental health inmates that we have now has also grown. The amount of inmates on medications has also grown. So this is becoming a real challenge. We also have the challenge of mental health professionals looking outside of corrections for a place to work. With society having a mental health crisis also, so many people going to therapists, so many people on medication, so many people needing help and wellness help. A lot of the people who would normally be working inside our prisons and doing mental health work are working on the street, which it's hard to blame them. You can work in an office out here. You can see, a few patients a day, or you can come inside and deal with some of the worst mental health. So it's harder getting people inside our prisons, and we've got more mental health to take care of. And that combination is a big challenge for a lot of places. And I think our jails, even more so than our prisons, because so many of the people they're dealing with, the inmates they're dealing with, they'll go out on the street, feel like they don't need the medications that they were on, come off of them, and now you're dealing with a person who is out of control. Or they go out on the street and they try to self-medicate through illegal medications or illegal drugs, and now you're dealing with that. Detox, alcohol, drugs coming into our jails, and the people who are on those is a daily fight for our jail officers. So, what else? Well, the BOP's had a really tough year, the Bureau of Prisons. Just last week they talked that they're closing 6 federal camps, and they're also going to close, unfortunately, one of the has a lot of name recognition right now is FCI Dublin, because there's been a lot of staff sexual assaults and a lot of charges and people who went to jail, including the warden. And so that's been going on for a couple of years, and they're going to go ahead and close that facility, which is probably a very smart plan. Another thing that came out last week, Rikers Island, they're taking a look at a federal takeover of Rikers Island because of the conditions there. I don't know a lot about that situation. I mean, I just know what I read. And but the fact that you've got the federal government taking over such a large jail that's been around for a long time is very worrisome. What's going on there? Is this political? Is it a lack of leadership? It's the leaders that are missing something. So I wonder a lot about what's going on there, but that could happen pretty soon. And who knows what kind of changes are coming. The change in administration, January 20th, you may be getting new administrations across the board at several areas. So we'll see. I think there's going to absolutely be a change in who they put in these top positions. And I just hope that they're going to bring back leaders who understand the challenges of corrections. As I look out across corrections and I look at a lot of the people in the last few years who've been put in the top positions, I see people who didn't come up through the ranks. I see people who didn't work a lot in prison. They may have been attached to a prison, a budget analyst, a psychologist, but they weren't working day in and day out in the workings of a prison. And I don't believe that a lot of them understand what it takes. And I think that's where some of our problems are coming from. That's just me, but that's kind of what I see. And I'm hoping we get some administrators with some experience. I hope they reach back in there and grab people. There's a lot of people out there with good ideas. There's a lot of people out there with experience, and bring them on board and let them start leading these agencies. And I'm not picking on anyone. There's a lot of agencies that need leadership right now. And I'm really hoping for some changes there. Let's see what else. I think that's about it, except I'd like to give you a closing thought. And we need leaders who truly understand the essence of leadership. As I look across the corrections landscape, I see too many individuals who treat leadership as a game of hopscotch. And what I mean is they hop from one job to the next. They're looking for the next political appointment. They're looking for how they can promote themselves, right? And I see that across the board out there. And a lot of this is being done on the backs of their colleagues. We talk about having a corrections family. We talk about being there for each other. But if we've got leaders who aren't part of that, it causes a whole cycle of problems. It gets rid of the trust. And once you don't trust your leaders, and they don't trust you because they don't know you, or because that trust has just broken down, once that happens, we're not working together well anymore. This self-serving approach undermines the fundamental principles of true leadership. A true leader does not simply climb the ladder of success alone, but brings others along on the journey. Genuine leadership is about empowering and uplifting those around you, fostering a culture of collaboration, trust, and mutual respect. Look around where you're at. Do you have that? And if you don't, why not? And if you're a supervisor, and we had this discussion last week in a class, the supervisor in the middle wanted to know, I'm not the administration, I'm not the officer. How do I change this? So let me say this. You are an example. You're an example every single day, up and down the ladder. The only thing you have to decide is, are you a good example or a bad example? Right? The leaders above you see the example you set. Those below you see the example you set. And that example, if you live that, if that's who you are, that's going to be followed. People are going to look at that. They're going to see that that's genuine. And they're going to imitate it because it works. So building that culture of collaboration and trust, that's what you can do. Do you trust your employees? That's a hard thing for a lot of correctional people to do. The correctional supervisors. Do you delegate? And if you don't, why not? Because you're scared that you'll delegate that to someone and they won't do it exactly the way you want it? And then maybe they make a mistake. Oh, dear Lord, somebody made a mistake. And now you're in trouble. Is that where the fear comes from? How about if we stop making mistakes, horrible things, and start making them what they are, which are learning opportunities? I'm not talking intentional. I'm talking a true mistake. That should never be a career killer. A mistake shouldn't be a career killer. It should be a moment of growth. And the only way that people get the chance to make mistakes is if their supervisors let them. Give them opportunities. Find the skills that they're good at and put them in a position to where they can use those skills to succeed and to build up the entire organization. In corrections, this is extremely critical. Leaders must be role models of integrity and empathy. We've got to guide our teams through complex decisions, challenging environments, and a true correctional leader must inspire confidence. Motivate others to strive for excellence and create an atmosphere where everyone feels valued and supported. Now, I came into corrections a long time ago, and I can tell you, I had some of those captains, some of those lieutenants at the state. You'd think they were drill sergeants. If they were up in your face, they were just, it wasn't a touchy-feely time. But at the end of the day, when I walked out of Missouri State Pen or when I walked out of Leavenworth, here's what I knew. I knew that those captains and lieutenants would do anything in the world to get through that door, to get through that wall, to help me if I needed it, right? I knew that although I might get read the riot act, I might, I might get called names that people aren't even, it would put you in HR these days. Even though that might happen, if I went out and made a decision on my own, trying to do the right thing, I wasn't going to get fired for it. I wasn't going to get let go. It wasn't going to affect my career forever. They gave me opportunities to make mistakes, and I made a bunch of mistakes. I still make mistakes. Anybody that says they don't is lying. But that's what I'm talking about when I say build a culture, when I say Build trust. Your employees have to trust you. And this goes for wardens down to everybody else also. Do your employees trust you as a warden, as a superintendent, as a jail administrator? Do they know that they have the ability to try new things, to have new ideas? Do they have the opportunity to take policy and apply it and not be ran out on a rail if they make a mistake? You want recruitment. You want retention. This is what we've got to do. We've got to build these teams. I remember days when lieutenants or captains and we'd rotate a shift and other people would rotate with that supervisor because we were teams. We understood that they were there to take care of us. They were there to protect us. I felt safe at work. Do your employees feel safe at work? Do your employees feel safe to bring you ideas? Do you get a lot of questions during the day? I tell this to officers. If inmates don't bring you questions, if inmates aren't coming to you for answers, you're not a very good officer. They don't look upon you as knowledgeable and trustworthy. Well, the same thing goes up the chain of command. If your officers and your supervisors are not bringing you questions, are not bringing you new ideas, are not bringing you solutions, they don't trust you. You need to look at that. Take a look inside. When leaders prioritize the well-being and the development of their people, they not only achieve greater success, but they build a stronger, more cohesive team or shift or agency or jail or prison. It's time to redefine what it means to be a leader. Let's move away from being self-serving. Let's move towards a model that's inclusive, collaborative, focused on the greater good. I've heard people say it for years. We come in here as a shift, we're going to leave as a shift. Are you acting like a team while you're in there? Does the shift matter to you, or is it just words? I hope it's not. I hope you'll take a look. I hope you'll do a little introspection and see, are you being the leader that you can be? Are you being the leader that you should be? When you take a look at the leaders in your life, do you emulate them? Are you as good as they are? And if not, why aren't you trying? I'll leave you with that. That's my thought. I'll end 2024 with that thought. I thank you so much for listening to the Prison Officer Podcast. It's been a great run, and I'm looking forward to more episodes, more guests, and I'll keep trying to find interesting people because there's thousands of them. There's thousands of interesting people working in our jails, so it's not hard. It's just making the connection and getting the interview. But I'm looking forward to getting you more interviews for you to listen to and hopefully learn from. And I guess I'll just say, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever you celebrate. And when you go in there for the next few weeks, especially, it's a tough time of year for some people. Make sure that you ask that person that you're working with, how are you doing? Take a moment to listen to them. And when you get home, remember to drop the correctional officer off a little bit, okay? Go home as mommy or daddy or spouse or whatever it is, and try to let down a little bit and really connect with those people at your house, because they're the ones that are supporting you. They're the ones that are going to get you through this. And someday you're going to get retired and you're going to stop and you're going to look around. And did you take care of those relationships also? That's it for now. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. I'll talk to you next episode. If you enjoy these podcasts, the best way to support the Prisoner Officer Podcast is to share these episodes with your friends or family on social media. Let me invite you to visit www.theprisonofficer.com. If you haven't already, check out the Prison Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button. Or leave us a message, or better yet, leave us a review. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast, Google, or Spotify, please click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls.